I don't like the Beatles. Henry?
The only album I really liked of them was Sgt. Pepper's
No.
Thing. That one
I
I liked.
never liked the Beatles. I think they're a bunch of wankers. I like George Harrison solo
Harrison,
and
Paul McCartney,
Paul McCartney, John Lennon,
Ringo.
Ringo, not so much. He's okay. He's okay now, but in the Beatles, no. I reckon they're a bunch of I reckon they're a bunch of wankers. Paul McCartney was supposed to be fucking underage girls. Bit of a pedophile back then. Yeah.
How many bands have done that?
Yeah.
And how many girls fucking really filled that big bloody boy band?
Yeah.
A lot. And they were
Yeah, but Paul McCartney was known for it. Yeah.
a lot of those boy bands have underage girls. All over. They did do it.
Oh, that Bill Wyman from Rolling Stones, wasn't it? Bill Wyman?
Yeah, he is another one.
How old was that girl?
They're not very old.
Yeah, he was an old man. Yeah.
So long.
Yes, yeah.
Coming through wilderness, so coming through, like a rocket, search for the very first time, like a hurricane, take my feet through mine.
Office Square Suite, I've checked that to get you low prices on huge ranges of lamp devices.
And if you find a competitor with a low price, we'll beat it by 5%. See website for details. Officeworks, helping you make bigger things happen. So basically, I'm going to say, but in LA, love was all the rage. He would see things, he would see just the absurdities in life, and he would be able to put it down in words that, made sense. And like, the line after everyone thinks of life is just a game, and you like the part you're playing, that's a beautiful line. Though hugely popular on the West Coast, Love never achieved the worldwide success many believe they deserve. We were having problems with our record company, even after the really fantastic deal in Cold with MCA, which was a much larger record company than Electro was at the time. And they just were not going to let us go. And so we came up with the dumbest idea we could. We thought if we hooked them up with the doors, they'll let us go. So we hooked them up with the doors instead of letting us go. They kind of used the money that they would have used to promote us for the doors. So basically we shot ourselves in the foot. But in the Love documentary, Love Story, Arthur Lee candidly reveals another reason for their lack of success: his unwillingness to tour outside of California. I had a good thing going on the West Coast, and actually, to tell you the truth, I was afraid to man. Because I didn't know how I would be received. I was just 19 years old. I'm 20 years old. I didn't know that's all I was saying. Nothing good for them. We lost Arthur Lee to leukemia in 2006. Love's groundbreaking album, Forever Changing, is listed in Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, coming in at an impressive number 40, ahead of Meet the Beatles and Bob Marley Legend. The Buffalo Signal, their first one was nowadays Clancy, Andy, and Sting. Mine's a little puppy that one of them had. Named after the Buffalo Springfield Steamroller team, the Laurel Canyon folk rock band consisting of Huey Martin, Richie Furay, Bruce Palmer, Neil Young, and Stephen Stills would gain worldwide attention with a song about protests and unrest on the Sunset Strip. It was just honestly an avalanche of kids from all over the world that came to Sunset Strip. And they basically just closed the street down on the weekend. Couldn't ride on Sunset Strip. It was just like that down there. From Crescent Heights to Doheny was just full of people walking to the hanging coffee shop with the burger money and the Hardy tables. Different flavors of the idea, arresting all kinds of underage kids. It was not unusual to go down to Sunset Boulevard and see 500 kids with their arms against the wall, being frisked. Basically, it was open season on business. Combined with police harassment and the closing of the popular nightclub Pandora's Box, culminated in a November 12, 1966 protest that turned violent. I remember sitting by the pool once, and Stephen Stills came by, and he says, "Well, no one's playing this song I'm working on, you guys go let it win." From the car, he's sitting by the pool. Something happened here. What it is, ain't exactly clear. Well, that was the anthem because it really did speak to what was going on the street. And it really was the hippies against the police. Which was ridiculous, really. Why not just let everybody? It was very peaceful, Why not let people have a good time and be happy? In August of '67, the Los Angeles City Council turned the streets at the intersection of Sunset and Crescent Heights needed to be realigned, and Pandora's Box was demolished. The headline in the LA Times read, "Hippies pout, politicians cheer." Buffalo Springfield did the
The female attention that you got was like nothing I'd ever seen in my life.
And like, that's the guy that I just saw on the street. How Jimmy James became Jimi Hendrix, and later,
I could smell the peanut butter in his mustache coming at least 4 feet away.
just behind the Kenny Country Store, I walked out there, I was little Kenny's Love Street pad. No, it's the Jim Morrison Love Street house. While living here with longtime girlfriend Pamela Corson, Morrison would pen lyrics to the Doors albums Waiting for the Sun and most of the Soft Parade, including the song Love Street about the house and the neighborhood. The lyrics, I see you live on Love Street, there's this store with a creature came, is a reference to the Canyon Country Store just outside their window. World famous groupie Pamela DeBar has a special memory of the house. He caught up with her on one of her rock and roll tours in Laurel Canyon. I used to stay with a friend of mine who lived right next door here. And I heard the Doors music being played. And I said, who in the world has this pre-release Doors album, you know? So I would sit down with all these steep stairs and I peeked in the door and it was just singing along to the end. It was pretty hot. I actually walked into the house and proceeded to do a back bend. So I just learned how to do a back bend. So I was very proud of it. And I looked up and Pam was looking down too. And she said, get the leaf out of my house.
The female attention that you got was like nothing I'd ever seen in my life.
So you left a huge wanted to be a promo guy and to be a rock star. He hated it. He was trying to, be taken seriously as an artist, as a musician, and a sex object. And I'm telling you, it's all part of it. And if you really look where you people more than one, you wouldn't listen to you. So it's all part of it. We never understood that.
He's overwhelmed by all these, which I think is what led him to break apart.
And that led to legendary fights between Jim and Pam.
The neighborhood would all hear it, people came to see it, but they particularly seized Pam's on Jim's clothes out the window, his record collection, and if it was a really bad fight, his book collection, which is very important to know.
On New Year's weekend of 2012, an arson fire destroyed much of the house, which is currently being rebuilt. But the Love Street house is no stranger to fires, and one in particular is a widely debated subject. Then photographer Bobby Klein is Jim and Pam's neighbor.
They were in love. They were in love. It was very tender, and when Jim was straight, it was beautiful.
There's always been this big controversy about this one scene in the Oliver Stone film where Jim puts Pam in the closet and lights it on fire, and many people have said it never happened.
You know, it happened because Pam came to my house right after, and we were one house separate from the other. Jim was accusing her of sleeping with some playboy around town, and he was pretty messed up. He got really, really angry, threw in the closet, lit the closet on fire, and it happened. He came to my house afterwards and freaked out.
So you went down and you actually saw that the closet had been on fire?
All around the edges, it was all small. Yeah, there was a lot of people said it didn't happen, but it definitely happened.
Sadly, the normally quiet, reserved poet would face many personal demons in his very short life.
I could see it was a bit too much, it was a bit uncomfortable, because at the very heart and core of who Jim was, he was truly a gentle soul, very sweet, and also very kind.
When I first met him, he was Jimmy James, and we were playing at the California Club, and he was playing with the Isley Brothers. The first day I met him, he was playing my guitar, walking in, and there's a string to me and playing my ass. So, and that's not something that a musician can do to try to, pick up a guy's ass, He said, well, she went so long, and I got it, and I moved myself, and so that was so cute that I laughed, and we became friends right then. Jimi Hendrix was very quiet. People say, what was he like? He was like a little boy.
Very shy. Very shy. You read it as insecure. Except the moment he stepped onto the stage, it was magic.
When we knew him back in the day, he wasn't very good. He was just kind of a journeyman guitar player like so many others were, and then he started having a flick. So another piece without an issue later. So I was putting everybody kind of, nobody wants to get out. And but he saw something different there, and he was able to actually utilize the sound. So I looked at it as, a piece of crap, and he saw it as, a tool. So I have to give him all the props because he deserves them. I'm the one that gives the gift that he opened for us. I've seen it actually in New York recently, in the side, and then months later at Monterey Pop Festival, and all of a sudden, the Jimi Hendrix Experience walks out of there, and I'm like, that's the guy that played guitar on the stage. I recommend the Deuces because of the witness and opening act. He was the opening act for this book. It was great. Correct. I mean, nobody knew what he was, and the music, of course, is very different.
And when Hendrix hit the stage, we went Davy, we went the monkey, Peter.
They were booing and calling. Anybody can get hurt by that. I mean, too, like I really like to say, and he left the tour. Do you remember the moment where you heard him and you thought, wow, he's not just a regular guitar player anymore. I came to the whiskey and he was playing. And we didn't know it was the same as Jimmy James. This was, Jimmy Hendrix, and we didn't know it. So I went in and said, oh man, this is from California going. And then he's playing, and he has all of these people with this, rapt attention. And wow. Where the hell did he get this from? I was just, he went from here to here, and just, matter of a few months. And, I asked him about it, and he just, hey, I'm with you. And that was his answer. He just practiced. And the stars lined up for him, and he was supposed to be doing Hendrix. Up next. That was the thing that was going on in the middle 60s, the monkey audition. So we go over and in walks Peter, totally naked.
And the basement look at Mama Cass.
Her struggle and her triumph really gives people hope.
Now, you might not believe it, but during the 60s, two of the most notorious party houses in Laurel Canyon actually belonged to members of the Monkees, Peter Tork, and just up the street, Mickey Dolenz's house.
Look at these little boyish, innocent faces that you guys have. What we were going compared to what goes on these days.
Right.
It actually was very innocent and naive.
But that was the thing that was going on in the 60s, and then in the middle 60s, the monkey auditions, that was a buzz in the air. Everybody was going back. And then very famously, they auditioned Stephen Stills. This would have been before the Buffalo Springfield. He had a tooth, kind of a snaggled tooth. And then they said, well, your tooth is all right. And he said, well, let me send my roommate down. And that was Peter Tork. Of the four monkeys, two of them were true musicians. One was Mike Nesmith, who wrote and sang, and Peter Tork. The other two were more showbiz people. They had Davy Jones playing the Archibald Dodger plays in England musicals, and Mickey Dolenz had been in circus ballet. So those were the two. Steve's an entertainer.
In the book Canyon Dreams, The Magic and Mystery of Laurel Canyon, author Harvey Beavern's inclusion of the Monkees was initially met with some resistance.
When I did the Canyon book, there was some discussions about why you need so much coverage to these people. I said, you can't ignore that the Monkees were on the radio from late 66 to 1970, whatever it was, constantly. Forget the TV show, the songs are just so good. The Monkees was not a group, it was a television show about a group. That's very similar to Glee, but all the members of that cast could actually sing and dance and perform. Well, that's what the Monkees was. They exposed me to the songwriters behind the music. There's Neil Diamond has, he wrote I'm a Believer, and Voice and Heart, who wrote some of his songs.
And another Laurel Canyon icon as well.
This is Carole King. She'll be writing some songs for you, and it was just her and an old grand piano and an old woolen sack tape recorder.
But it was Peter and Mickey's homes that were the top of Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, he had a real community.
Jimi Hendrix lived there for
Oh,
a
yeah.
while, didn't he?
Yeah, Peter had a very different lifestyle. This was very community.
Mickey's former wife and still close friends, Samantha Dolenz, remembers all too well.
Peter loves Mickey. Well, I knew Betty like that.
Let's get too much in it, public that. Oh, I just really lovely that, but it was more from a yoga sense, and it's sort of, hey, it's that natural sense, hey, it's a body thing. One time we went to a cocktail party on the road, and in walks Peter, totally naked. It was from that sense of, hey, I'm a child of God, I'm not ashamed of my body, be natural. I was born and raised in LA, so I was more hanging on the back of my head. The place I was in, it looked like you're in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, a world cabin, and Disneyland was built. So it would start out on a Friday night as a little cocktail party and some food, and Monday morning people would still be, wandering around the garden naked, falling into the hole. This is a perfect example of why Nikki says he doesn't remember a lot. Maintaining independence, none is done since frustrating unity, because when you take care of the but there was a night making the calls very well, where singer-songwriter friends John Lennon and Harry Nilsson were hanging out his place. All of a sudden, somebody called and said, "My Wilson's coming over." I mean, he hadn't been out of his house for years. Months. This was during a period of time when Beach Boy Brian Wilson became reclusive after suffering a nervous breakdown. Sure enough, the limo pulls up and gets out with his bathrobe still on and his flip-flops, and comes in and sits in my little recording studio and sits around and hearing and people. He starts playing the Beach Boys, he kind of sings, "Love, gotta go to the cannibals, the beach and the but something is stuck all over. How's got but still by blood in every chance. And everybody's playing along and everything with it. I think I just, all right, Brian, over the bridge. The basement thing, I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Yes. When's the last time you listened to some of these things? There's a couple of those things that I've mentioned here. I just haven't heard that I haven't even listened recently, but this one says, here, Brian Wilson, Harry, which was Harry Nilsson, and Keith Moon. It's so fun, here's my basement. Yeah. And this one is just says John and Harry, and it's not John or Harry Nilsson. Oh, it's just, I haven't listened to these in 40 years, and I have no idea. Right. Right. It's a viewing party when you give us a call. Just as the movie performing, he felt from Southern New York was disbanding, featuring John Phillips, and the Moonwalks, which included Jenny Doherty and a force of nature named Mama Cass Elliot. The musically brilliant John Phillips decided to recreate his trio with Jenny and his beautiful new wife, Michelle Phillips. But Cass Elliot was determined to make it a quartet, no matter how much John protested. It's true that John did not want one mom in the group. John had a certain vision in his brain of what this should look like, but he had this really beautiful wife, and I think that he really wanted that type of look. And my mother didn't necessarily fit that mold. Was it a little discriminatory? Possibly. So Cass headed west to LA and wound up in an unusual place. Is it true that she actually for a time lived beneath the canyon store? Yes. Before she formally moved to the Laurel Canyon and later on Woodrow Wilson, she was a tenant of the Laurel Canyon store. Current country store owner Tommy Dina took me downstairs to show me Mama Cass's old apartment, which is now used for storage. Okay, so this is their room. This is their room. This is good, and you said there's a secret passage? And you want to see the secret passage? Yes, but the passage, you see those steps? Yeah. And there's a secret passage in the place we're talking about. So when she was leaving and coming, nobody would see her. It wasn't long before John Phillips moved to LA and finally let Cass join the group, and the mamas of the Papas were born. My mom's home was really the center of a lot of happenings in Laurel Canyon. She was famous for putting people together. She was very friendly, very funny, very hip and witty. she would meet these guys and say, well, hey, then I'll introduce you to my friends, you know. So she met Eric Clapton when he was with Cream, didn't know a soul in LA, and he's very shy. And she said, well, come to my house tomorrow afternoon. I'll sit friends over and we'll have a little barbecue in the backyard.
Among Casper's friends that day was David Crosby, who brought along a singer he had just found in Florida, Joni Mitchell.
She invited Mickey Dolenz to come, and he brought a camera, 16mm camera. Throughout this whole afternoon, I was photographing this stuff going on. Mickey was filming away. So years later, I thought, oh, Mickey, you must have some great shots, probably with pictures of me, photographing Eric Clapton and Joni Mitchell. And he said, no, not really. And it was because he said, it's just ridiculous. It's flowers and the dog. And here's and the action. I'm like, Eric, move! And I just, he made her footage of like rack focus from the flowers and the cigarettes.
Sadly, there's no footage of the actual icon from this historic day at Cass Elliot House. Thanks, Mickey.
Even though she had to really, really work hard to make people accept her for who she was, they did. Right? And I think that her struggle and her triumph really, really gave people hope. Do you recall the moment when you found out that you lost your mom? I do. My mom was in London when she passed away, and she had just completed a 2-week engagement at the wedding. And she had said it was my grandmother for the summer. I was coming home early from camp, and my grandmother sitting me down at the table and said, telling me that my mom was gone and that she was never coming home. I remember it being very difficult to accept and believe because she traveled so much for work that there was a part of my brain that had tried to convince myself that it was just another trip and that she was going to come home.
I then asked Ellen a very difficult question. If she would put to rest the cruel myth of her mother's death.
It's okay because I feel like since I've really been out there talking about it, the accuracy of the Google hit has actually changed a little bit. And you don't, when you Google Mama Cass Elliot or Cass Elliot, you don't always come up now with that she died of those cancer. What you come up with more than often is a heart attack. The real story is that she stayed up for 36 hours and went to a bunch of parties and celebrated this, milestone where she had actually, for the first time, been billed as Cass Elliot and not as Mama Cass. And that was something that was hugely important to her, that she have an identity outside of just being a mom. Although she loved being a mom on a new level, she wanted to have people know about her.
In the fickle world of music, it wasn't unusual for bands to break up and its members to regroup with other musicians. But in 1968, two very special relationships formed, and they would make a lot of beautiful music together.
The Crosby, Stills and Nash blend had been brewing for a while. Stephen put together the Buffalo Springfield, and then of course David Crosby was in the Bourbons.
But fighting within the groups caused Stills to leave and Crosby to be kicked out. So the two decided to form their own short-lived group, the Frozen Noses. It was during this time that Crosby, on a trip to Florida, discovered a fair-haired Canadian folk singer named Joni Mitchell. So impressed by her musical brilliance, he brought her back to LA and took her to Mama Cass's house. Frozen, 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 and ice cream nestles in the air.
And Joey sat there under a tree, playing her entire first album. They were just recording it at that time. No one knew her, no one had heard of her.
Joni was a triple threat, an angelic voice, a poetic writer, and a musically accomplished guitar player.
And she only played in particular when she tuned the guitar to a chord, and then she just get across, and it just truly, Eric Clapton was fascinated by that. He's staring at her fingers, and we were all just mesmerized by these beautiful songs.
everybody loves the Birds, the Hollies, and the Buffalo Springfield. Why don't we all investigate this together?
And it was a match made in harmony heaven. Always.
They're seeing that there is Capricorn, and they're pretty stubborn and tenacious, and healthy as Leo. It's kind of devoid of some of the nonsense, you know. And they piss each other off, you know. Graham is certainly the guy that holds it all together. He's a gentleman in the middle.
Along the way, another Buffalo Springfield member, Neil Young, would also become part of the group. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's even Leo famously. We're always having a fight, and Leo would always leading a group at the end of the day. And then you probably so mad. You're making that kind of music and that kind of harmony, that triumphs over all the petty things, the little tiny things that bug you about the other guy.
Just prior to Crosby, Stills and Nash forming, another relationship blossomed between Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell.
Those two people found each other. They're both such wonderful, sweet souls and such great artists. Both of them, Graham and Johnny, exceptional people. And they found each other. And it was very sweet and very beautiful. It seemed perfect. It seemed like just like it ought to be, you know. But you remember hanging with Graham, you remember telling me down the street, they were listening. I could only see their house from mine. There was a little bit of the firehouse with a cat and the things in the fire.
It's a very, very, very fun house to catch in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Everything is easier.
Sadly, the relationship wouldn't last. The song Willie on Mitchell's Ladies and Canyon album and Nash's song Single Man both speak of the relationship's demise. Those group of relationships came with tumultuous times and heartbreak. Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young have given us some of the most beautiful music of all time. The legend of World Heaven continues.
He was actually the guy that every single musician looked up to and said, this guy is an absolute genius.
Laurel Canyon was home to many music icons who lived and worked on the world, but there was one in particular who was unlike any other, and the impression he left on everyone he touched was truly unforgettable.
You know, when Frank Zappa first came out, everybody thought he was a clown. Everybody thought he was sort of the court jester of rock and roll. Until you really started listening to Freak Out, and you started listening to We're Only in It for the Money, or Absolutely Free, and you realized that he was not just that, he was the maestro. He was actually the guy that every single musician looked up to and said, this guy is an absolute genius.
Well, quite different. He was older than him by a few years, but he was wiser in his years, you know, with the show.
He was also very mysterious and enigmatic. And if you could make him laugh, it was like the sun came out all over the world, you know. You could read his knees, you could crack him up and make your day. Because you wanted to impress him, because he was so impressive.
What do you do for money? Have a rock and roll band.
And right by his side, his female counterpart, Gail.
That's a couple that took a lot of hits for a lot of people. They were both on the front line, defining society through behavior, clothing, being independent, starting labels, reassuring people. I admired that marriage from a distance because even Mark Woolman tells me Gail helped make Frank happen. And I know she's still the custodian of his music estate.
Oh, that's true. Well, and still, he's the mama lion of rock and roll.
What do you do for money?
Have a rock and roll band.
Okay, so the first time that you encountered Frank, what was the experience like for you?
Well, what was it like for me? There are moments in your life, and especially when you're young, where the universe speaks to you directly and there is no ignoring it. And this was one of those times for me because I was introduced to Frank and I could smell the peanut butter in his mustache from at least 4 feet away. Okay. I'm like, oh, this is I don't know what this means, but here he comes. And he walked over to me and didn't stop walking. And I thought, well, I'm not going to back up. And he put the briefcase down between my feet and said, "You're cute." That's it. I think the term is in love. I don't know how else to describe it.
They were married 1 week before daughter, Lieutenant Zappa, was born. For a very long 4 months, the Zappas lived at the infamous log cabin at the corner of Laurel Canyon and
Who's that?
Restricted.
Yes, everybody lived there. But members of the band, the artists who did the album covers, some secretary, and people that just showed up from time to time.
But you were always amazed to be sitting there, and all of a sudden, who would walk in the door? John Lennon, Mick Jagger, or Brian Wilson, or L.A. Philharmonic. You never knew who was going to be there.
It was 4 months of hell trying to raise a child, by the way. But other than that, it was interesting because, some of the people that showed up. And also horrifying because some of the people that showed up.
I think we perhaps inspire some of the people who like what we do to get a little bit looser and a little bit more devious. As I said before, about progress not being possible without some sort of deviation. Maybe be devious.
Some of those deviants included Zappa's band, the Mothers of Invention, Alice Cooper, and the all-girl band, the PTOs.
And what Frank really loved doing was capturing a moment in time with the GTOs. He wanted to save, these teenage girls and their wacky experiences forever. So he thought we should write our lives into song and you can do a record with us. So that's what we did.
The great thing about Frank was he would make fun of politics, and he would make fun of the establishment, but he would make just as much fun of the hippies, and make just as much fun of rock bands. So everybody was fair target for Frank.
I'm not going to take them up. Well, I just do what I do is a special type of entertainment for a specialized audience. If you're accustomed to ordinary rock and roll, then maybe what we do makes you think that it's shaking it up. Because most of the rock and roll has no information content in it. The basic function of it is to provide wallpaper to your lifestyle. And I'm usually different from that.
But above all else, Frank Zappa is considered by many one of the greatest composers of our time.
He wanted incidentally been a musician and a great guitar player, ultimately, and certainly, a wit and all of these other things that he's proved to be. But first and foremost,
What did he sing?
no way that he could
What did Frank Zappa sing? What did he write?
There's one album,
No tolerance for drug use.
I don't really know.
I've never
I don't
even-
recall any of his music.
Neither can I.
and hearing.
But I read he was brilliant.
If you were in the Mothers of Invention, you were the best player in LA, because he would only take the best player, because you would have to be in order to sit and read Frank's music.
Do you still talk to him? I don't know that I talk to him as much as he talks to me. First of all, I see him in my children every day, but I see my children. He's there. He's present for me. And as far as him telling me things, you'd be amazed the number of interviews that I've done where if somebody pressed a point that I just thought was vile, they'd go home and find out they didn't have it on tape. It's crazy. But he's rescued me so many times in my life since he's been gone. So when you drive around in this area, does it feel good to you? Does it bring back memories?
Yes, it does. It's strange, but the vibe is still here. You've seen the place and you remember all of the different people that lived here, all of the music that came through here. And so it lives inside of the heart. We had it. It was there. What you imagined you could do it. And anybody who used to do it through the heart,
and they teach about loving other human beings as people.
In the 60s, artists believed they could change the world with their music. And for a short period of time, in a very special place called Laurel Canyon, they did. For more on today's show, go to 867.com/INLA. I'm Tina Holiday. See you next time.
Thank you and good morning. Morning for me. I usually Tuesday do a morning, but how early today? So let's see.
Can you turn that
All
down?
right, show the picture, and you can say that, I started out as a folk singer in folk group, way back in the early sixties. And, that was at Hawaii, I was at the University of Hawaii, and I started singing in a coffee shop there, a coffee house, called the Green Queens Coffee House, and we put a group together, came to LA to seek our fortunes. We were called the Modern Folk Quartet. And we recorded a bit on Warner Brothers and a couple other labels. And on our last tour across the country, doing college concerts, because folk music was huge in colleges in the 60s. And we would just go back and forth across the country playing colleges and folk clubs. But on our last tour, in the beginning of 1966, we stopped our little motorhome. We had a Clark Cortez motorhome, and we stopped at a little second-hand store in Michigan. And we all ran in to buy junk that we didn't need, but there was a big table full of used cameras, second-hand cameras. And someone in the group grabbed one and said, "Oh, a camera." And then I said, "Well, hey, I'll get one too." We never thought about having a camera or taking pictures, but, and so then the one guy in the group said, "Pull into the next drugstore and I'll buy film." So he ran into the piece of little yellow Kodak box. And then I said, "Well, what are these numbers on here? What is this and what is it?" He said, "Well, look on the box and it'll say, it'll tell you how to set it." So it says Sunlight 250 at 8. So I said, "Oh, okay, here's 250, here's 8. We'll go out in the sunlight and shoot." So for 3 weeks we took pictures of each other. And we got back to LA, got the film developed, and lo and behold, it was slide film. I had no idea about any kind of film. I said, "Wow, look at little pictures, let's have a slideshow, and we'll invite all our friends." And when that first slide hit the wall, 8 feet wide, I just couldn't even believe it. I thought this is the most magic thing I've ever seen. Now, mind you, in those days when you had a slideshow with a Kodak slide projector, and it would go click, and that's when it hit the wall, click, and then it was like, wow, it was just unbelievable. And in the digital age, it's much easier to carry them around and project them and all, but they don't look quite the same as they did with the old Kodak slide projector. But that first slideshow, I vowed, I've got to take more of these things so we can have more of these slideshows, because this is really fun. So I spent the next, month photographing all my friends, the guys in the group, their girlfriends, and anything that I saw. I mean, old trucks, cats. I remember getting close-up rings and photographing snails on the ivy, and they get well up at 8-foot, snails. And I just was having so much fun with it. And some of my friends were David Crosby
Mama Cass, and Steve Stills, and these were all people that I, kind of grew up in the folk music business with. We played the same clubs, and we would see each other in the Laurel Canyon, or at the Troubadour Club, or we crossed paths on the road. I started photographing them, and pretty soon, people started using the pictures. Why we could use this for a magazine, or for the back of an album or something. And so I kind of just made the transition from a singer to a photographer without really thinking about it. So today, I'm going to, this is a little different than the usual slideshows. Now, back in the old days, slides were only color. You couldn't project the black and white. But I'm going to start with black and white because I have this book here of black and white photos that we self-published at the Morrison Hotel. It's not in any stores or anything yet. So I'm going to start with some of these things, and then we'll get to the old-fashioned color slideshow. This was, I was shooting publicity pictures of James Taylor. And they only needed black and white because in those days you couldn't put a color picture in the newspaper. They had to be black and white. So when a group needed publicity pictures, that meant just black and white. So we were shooting these pictures at a friend of mine's place called The Farm, and James leaned on that post. He's a big, tall guy, and leaned on that post in his blue work shirt and a sort of reddish background. Just was so boring that I said, wait a minute, James, and I got my color camera. Took a couple shots, thinking, I gotta have one of these for my slideshow, to show my friends, So I took a couple of color pictures, and the manager saw them and said, wow, these are great, we want to use one of these for the album cover. So it became the album cover for Sweet Baby Jane, kind of accidentally. But I always liked this black and white shot better. And I believe in the old 12-inch square album covers, this was an insert. It was a double album size, in the album. So, also, Sweet Baby Jane became one of my favorite all-time songs, and I would sing it to both of my little children, putting to sleep, Sweet Baby Jane. But of course, when I took the picture, I'd never heard the song yet, because you take these pictures before the album comes out usually. But I'm very proud to have that cover. In the early 70s, I used to go up to Neil Young's ranch quite a bit and hang out, and just, it wasn't a job or an assignment, I was just kind of there as a friend, and we'd walk around the farm, and I would take a bunch of pictures, which later got used in, mostly in songbooks. These songbooks out with lots of photos in them. So the publishers realized they didn't have those pictures, they wouldn't have to pay any photographer to use them, so that nowadays you get a song book and there's no photos in it. But this is Neil at his ranch in Northern California. Here he is driving a World War II Jeep across the cow field, bumping along. This is Joni Mitchell and Graham Nash during the time when they lived together in Laurel Canyon, and Graham wrote that song, Our House is a Very, Very, Very Fine House. This was on a trip up to Big Bear. It was like a 3-hour drive in a limousine to take pictures of Crosby, Stills, Nash for the inside of their first album. And I was sitting in the jump seat kind of facing them. After a couple hours, they kind of forgot I was there, and it was easy to take these standard photos. They didn't even notice what I was doing. Here's Jim Morrison at the Hollywood Bowl. One of my very good friends, in fact, the guy who owned the house where I did my very first slideshow, named Ron Jacobs, was the program director for KHJ Radio, and he would always invite me to come to all the concerts. And once again, a lot of these they're not assignments, they're not jobs, it's just me kind of hanging out. And I knew Jim because I've seen him play at the Whiskey, and Andrew played at the Whiskey and Go-Go as well. And he was a very quiet guy. People always say, what was Jim Morrison really like? They've seen the movie and they think he was a big, outgoing rock star, but really he was very quiet and very amused is the word I use. He would have a little smile and very cool. Hey, he'd smile and nod, but he didn't come up and, say, hey, guess what? He was not outgoing at all. He was very quiet, observant poet sort of a guy.
this is Chris Christopherson up in Colorado. There was a big recording ranch up there called Caribou Ranch, where groups could come and spend a whole week, and the band could live in the cabins, and they had a voice track and sublining capabilities, and a big recording studio, and everyone had a great time going there. One thing about being a photographer for these kinds of people, inevitably you're going to find yourself horseback riding. You know what happens is pretty often. And if you've got a bag with, 5 lenses and a couple of bodies, I mean, it's 30, 40 pounds of camera equipment, inevitably you're going to start galloping. And because you got to keep up, and these things banging against your side like that, and you're galloping along. So there's Chris at Caribou, and that's his little daughter Casey. So he's riding. This would have been, I guess, sometime in the late 70s. That's Timothy Smith, who's in the Eagles, was in Poco. I call it Timothy Smith rides the bowsprit. That's Johnny Austin's sailboat, the So What? And we were with the Eagles sailing over the not Catalina, Santa Cruz Island to take some photos. Here is Keith Richards, not a Rolling Stones tour, but a group called the New Barbarians, which was Ron Wood's solo group. Ron Wood from the Rolling Stones made a solo album, and Columbia Records wanted him to tour for a month and publicize the album. So Ron had to put a group together, and he got Keith to play guitar. He got Stanley Clark, who was the famous jazz bass player, and Ian McLagan was another English guy on the keyboard. He was in small spaces, and they barnstormed around the country, and I was on the tour for 3 weeks. And so here's this New Barbarian backstage pass, and this armless jacket, and they had a great big huge airplane, big passenger jet, and they would land, on the other side of the airfield. They wouldn't have to go through the airport. And when they would land, about 8 limousines would come out and converge around the airplane. So they'd walk right down the steps and jump into their limos and take off to the hotel. So he just found his limo, and he's standing there waiting for Ron Woody. So he's just standing there kind of waiting like this for Woody to come and get in the car with him. Here is George again, publicity shot, black and white. The week before, we'd done the Morrison Hotel album cover, and then the manager said, well, we need publicity pictures, and these are all color, so could you spend the day doing black and white pictures? So we went out to the beach in Venice, and I walked around, and took these pictures. It was in December, and they are under the Venice Pier, which isn't even there anymore. It got washed away in a storm years ago. And they're watching a surfer come in, and he's doing what they call shooting the piles, which is the surf around the big post that holds the pier up. It's very dangerous. And of course, Densmore in a white jacket as a surfer, so he's whoa, gnarly. Yeah. Here's Paul and Linda with Carney, and your two little daughters, Heather and Mary. Stella wasn't born yet. I met Linda at Modern Age Photo Lab. I'm not sure if it's here anymore. Is it? Well, I met her there in, I think, 66. And we became friends, and, we had lunch a couple times in LA. And then I was surprised to see she married Paul McCartney. And so one day she called me and asked if I could come out to their house in Malibu, because she needed pictures of the two of them they've done an album called Ram, and she was on the album, and they needed photos for a songbook. So I spent the day around the swimming pool with them, and it was a wonderful time. Also, there's another picture, couple of pictures coming up later in that day. Here's Tom Waits. He was writing the music for a Coppola film called One from the Heart. And so he was at the Velvet Club movie studio, so they gave him a little room, just slightly bigger than that grand piano. And he spent days and days in there composing music for this movie, and he had these papers strewn around the floor. Once again, it wasn't a photo assignment. A friend of mine was going to interview him, guy named Stephen Peoples. He said, hey, I'm going to go interview Tom Waits this afternoon. You want to come along? I said, sure. So they knew Tom from around town. So I got to hang out and take candid photos while they talk. There is Stephen Still and Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers had a huge mansion out in Surrey in England. It was called Brookfield House. And he sold it to Ringo Starr, and Ringo Starr sold it to Stephen Still. But we met Peter Sellers at a club one night in London, and Stephen said, hey, I'm living in your house, you know, but they use the house. I love that house. And Stephen invited him out on the weekend to come and hang out. And the guy in the middle is John the gardener, who had been there all those years. I mean, you can buy the house, you get John the gardener as well. He'd be out in his tweed jacket with his pipes, planting crocuses and daffodils. And he would always say, when Mr. Sellers was here, we would have this would happen, you know, Mr. Tracy would be here, and all these things were going on. And Stephen wrote a song called In John's Garden, which was about John the gardener. And they remember that movie, Being There. And Chauncey the gardener, Peter Sellers was really playing John the gardener. I mean, he was really, you know, kind of imitating what he learned from John the gardener. Fantastic guy. He's probably still there. Somebody bought the house in Stephen, I think a Levi company owner or something. It's still there. Here is the Monkees with Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson was the co-producer and co-writer of their movie Head, which they did after they cut their weekly TV show. And so here they are in the dressing room in Salt Lake City, Utah, just before they went on stage to film for the movie Head. So Jack was there. They were all really good friends of mine. I'll talk about that later, but I did have a job working on that TV set just about every day for a year and a half. And Mickey Dolan here was my neighbor up in Laurel Canyon. He lives just a little bit further down, look out down there from here. Here is that same New Barbarian store, and here is Steve and Woody. We were in a Learjet here, flying from LA to San Diego for the last concert. And you see the foot down there, and Steve's laugh. That's this 18-year-old Swedish model tour companion that he had with him. And so I'm sitting in the fourth seat. It's only a four-seater plane, and Ron's wife Cynthia was going to go, and the last minute she decided not to go. So the road manager said, "Hey, do something there with them." All the rest of the band and everybody had to ride the bus for 3 hours, but we had a 45-minute Learjet ride. So I didn't say they were a captive audience for me, but really I was a captive audience for them because they were just joking and, you know, doing sticks the whole way down there. It was really fun. I wish I had a movie camera. Okay, so now this is what a slideshow used to be like for me. And then, you know, before I ever had any rock stars, you know, I just had pictures like this to entertain my friends. Usually it would be a pit dark. We got a little one here. This would be a little bit bigger. And anyway, this is going to Neil Young's house up in Northern California, and that would be Neil Young's driveway right there. It was several miles back into the hills. And I just got out of the car and laid down on my stomach with an 18-millimeter lens to get that picture. Here's Neil Young's cow. And this is taking 500-millimeter lens, which really kind of compresses the whole thing. So, of course, all of these are film pictures. I now shoot digital. 5 years ago, I said, I will never shoot digital. I'm a film guy, you know, 50 years. But now I shoot digital. But of course, all of these are film things that I did back in the 60s and 70s. So nowadays, the job is to scan all of the slides and all the negatives that I had. Particularly one of my favorites. I love to shoot cows. Cows and trucks are fun to shoot because they sort of fill the frame. You know, they're rectangular. You can get them from the right angle. And just some of my favorite subjects. The manager of our singing group, Ernie Cohen, you could see at 8, like in the film box. This was a shot on Sunset Boulevard in LA long before we had cell phones, long before beepers. Maybe I had a beeper, but you have to stop at a payphone, you know. So I do errands in the afternoon. I stopped several times. So I pulled into this gas station, dialed the number, and then I just turned around, and that's what I saw. So I quickly took out my camera. This is on the Hollywood freeway. This car was approaching from behind. Luckily, I wasn't driving because I probably would have crashed trying to take this picture. And I saw it in the rearview mirror. He came up next to us. I saw his gums were flapping in the breeze. So now, it's a little bit smaller, but when I was on the road on my first tour with a group with 11 Spoonfuls, 66, and that was because their producer had been my roommate in the Post days, Eric Jacobson. And he called me in California in 66 and said, "Henry, you want to learn to be a photographer? Come on back to New York and spend the summer with the boys. They need tons of photos. We'll pay for all your film and processing, and then you'll learn how to be a photographer." So I said, great. So I did that. And every little city that we went to across the Midwest, I would notice the fire hydrant was a different color. And this is actually a New York fire hydrant. I mean, usually they're black and silver. But here in LA, they're all yellow. This is actually an orange one in LA. That was the Warner Brothers studio, The Eyes of Laura Mars. They were starting to do that posting. But so this is San Francisco, where they're blue and white. So every little town had a different color, and I always would run out to the corner, take a picture of the fire hydrant. So this is my first, from all of my friends, I had categories or series of things. Fire hydrants was one of them. This is the usual New York fire hydrant. So all these were done in the 60s, pretty much. And now, 45 years later, I have hundreds of fire hydrants. I very seldom see a color I don't have. This is upstate New York. In 1976 was the bicentennial, and 1976, 1776, right? The bicentennial. So people painted all over the place. They had these things painted like soldiers and things. This was in somewhere in the Midwest. And on TV, I was on the road with John Stewart, a folk singer, and we saw on TV that the Electro-Platers Union had dedicated this fire hydrant to the city. It might have been Cleveland or something. And I looked out the window, and there was a crowd of people around this fire hydrant, and I said, "Look, it's right there." So the next morning, as we were leaving, I jumped out and took this picture of the Electro-Platers fire hydrant. This is one of you watching D.C. So as I started taking all these pictures to entertain my friends, categories would inevitably come up. Actually, the first categories were all, if I took hundreds of pictures of my friends all week, inevitably there'd be 4 or 5 of them eating, shoving a hot dog in their mouth or something. And then there'd be some of people sleeping, some of people reading. So I had the reading series, the sleeping series, eating series, just among my close personal friends. And then I branched out and started collecting things like fire hydrants, was the first big one, and stars was one. This was over in India last year. So anywhere I go in the world or the country, I'm searching and hunting for about 60 categories of things. There's hearts and stars, t-shirts, tattoos, people giving the peace sign, people giving the finger, which you get a lot in rock and roll, mostly from David Crosby, and barns and old trucks, and, the usual things like flowers and babies and animals, but the things I hunt for. So these are all stars. And when I did these slideshows with my friends, remember, it was in the 60s, we were all hippies and we were smoking it, and so they would sit there and I would show a whole roller of stars. There would be 80 of them, and then they'd say more, and then I'd show one of my favorites. This is on Hollywood Boulevard where they have stars drawn, in the crosswalk. And right in the middle of the street, they have the yellow line going through the star. I always love that. As I look at this, I realize most of these are from the late 60s. Yeah, this was late 60s. This was on the wall of the Zari Club on Sunset Boulevard, an honorable musician. Then Heart was another series that I would look for. All the various places you can find Heart. And so as we travel around, you look for all these things, and then after months and years, when you assemble them all, you say, wow, there's really a lot of these. And toilets was another favorite. There's my little daughter, drinking some stuff with a stomach. Once on the road with 11 spoonfuls, Zalianowski, their lead guitar player, knocked on my door of the motel. I opened the gate, walking into the room, and squirted lighter fluid all over on the mirror in the motel room, and threw an axe on it. It was boom, and flames shot up. It just burns the liquid off the mirror. It doesn't really start a fire. And then he ran in the bathroom and squirted some in the toilet. And threw a match in and I flushed the toilet, and the flames shot up. And I just got a picture of that. So I had the flaming toilet. That was my first toilet picture. Then once at a party, I went into the bathroom, and in the toilet was one square of toilet paper floating there with a lipstick. It said red lips on it. It's floating. It just was so, I don't know what it stood for. It's sort of like goodbye or something. So you find, throughout your life, you'll find some interesting toilet shops. Here was one right on Fifth Avenue. Don't know who that guy was, eating a sausage there with a bag on his head. Then American Flag was another series that I've looked for all my life. It was hundreds and hundreds of hearts. This one had a heart and a flag. So when I could get two categories in one thing, that would be the transition, and we go from heart to flag, that way. There's exactly 5 drums with hearts on them. I should say at this point, I used Nikon cameras back then, and I learned to use a spot meter. I had an Minolta spot meter, and I never used the meter in the camera, but I had this external spot meter. I would take a reading like on somebody's face, and it would just be perfect. But nowadays, I graduated to digital, and I take almost everything on this little camera. I mean, if it's a concert, I have a big camera that I use, but I take hundreds of pictures a day with this. So nowadays, all the stars and fire hydrants and hearts I take with this little camera. But none of these are from this camera. That was LA in the 60s and years. So then this was Flags. That was up in Marin County, up in Northern California. An old 50s car. They stayed in Cassidy with an American flag. This is on an aircraft carrier. These opportunities are limitless for flag pictures. Here's Richard Pryor. We were shooting in my friend's garage, and we had that flag up for another picture we'd taken a few days before. And the watermelon was for lunch, actually. He came in and he was doing kind of like Robin Williams, he just does just a joke every second. He doesn't stop, and he just keeps clicking away. But that was a fun day. So here's another flag. That's for the 60s. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it was back, when was the hostage thing? Was that just, so it might have been 70s. So Mickey Mouse's, so that's a transition slide there between flags and Mickey Mouse's. Mickey Mouse's is another category that I've collected on my life. And you find those all over the place. The trick for me, and everything my friends was to get these things in odd situations. It couldn't just be a Mickey Mouse. in his first peace sign I took. And he's Ringo, of course, almost every picture he's doing that. And that would be a transition between peace signs and stars, you know. And this was in the 90s. So this is my first real music picture, real rock and roll picture. One day up in Laurel Canyon in '66, when I just got my camera, I heard guitar music coming out of one of the houses, and I walked up to the door, and Steven Stills was in there. And he was an old friend of mine. I had known him for, I met him in '63 in New York City, long before Crosby, Stills Nash, long before the Buffalo Springfield. So I said, hey, Steven, how you doing? He said, hey, we're going to the beach this afternoon, the Buffalo Springfield, to do a sound check. You want to come along? And I thought, yeah, I want to come along so I can walk on the beach and take photos for my slideshow. It was before I ever thought of being a music photographer. So while they were in the club doing the sound check, I was out on the beach shooting people. In fact, I got a picture of a guy with a monkey on his shoulder, and the monkey and the guy had the same little crew cut and beard. And it was one of my favorite shots. So I walked back to the Folk Club, and I was just photographing that big mural, thinking this will be good in the slideshow. And out the back door from the Buffalo Springfield. And I said, hey, you guys, just stand there a minute in front of that big mural, because I wanted to show the scope of the mural. And so they stood there and took a few shots, and a week later, a magazine called me, Teen Tech Magazine, and they said, we hear you have a picture of the Buffalo Springfield, and we'd like to run it, and we'll pay you $100. And I went, wow, what is this? I couldn't believe that somebody was going to pay me for a picture that I took, because I've been spending all my musician money on film and processing, and so that was, wow. That was the second epiphany. The first epiphany was the first slideshow, when that first slide hit the wall. The second epiphany was when somebody offered me money for one of these pictures. And so then I went to New York City and spent the summer with the Loving Spoonful. There they are. That's all you know, on the left, that I lit my toilet on fire. And the Spoonful, even though I was working for them for the whole summer, taking pictures, every time there'd be an opportunity for a group shot, which was what they really needed, they would treat being rock and rollers, they had to be like knocking boys, they had to give me the finger or do something, stick their tongue out, anything to ruin the group shot. It was a little game we had, so this is an example of some of the shot that we used was just like that in the back of one of the albums. And here are the Monkees on their TV set. One day, out of the blue, Tiger Beat magazine called me in '67. I guess we were just got back from New York. It was 11 Spoonful, and they said, "Would you go down to the sound stage where they're filming the Monkee show and spend the day, and we'll pay you for the day, and then we'll give us all the film." And they particularly wanted close-up headshots for magazine covers and posters. And so I go down in the morning, and each week would be, of course, a different episode. This was called Here a Sheet, There a Sheet. And you go in there Monday morning, and some crazy situation would be set up, and that would be the show for the week. So this was one morning. I walked in, and that's what I saw. There was about 20 dancing girls, and the whole week would be fantastic. Just hanging out with those guys. It wasn't really a job, They paid me $300 a day, and I wasn't married, didn't have any kids, so that was like a lot of money for me. And it was a lot of fun to hang out with these guys, and I went on the whole summer tour with them in '67. Same thing with David Cassidy. Some years later, Tiger Beat called me again and said, "When you go down to the Partridge Family TV soundstage and film for the day." So I walked on the set. I never met David before. He came up, I introduced myself, and we were talking, and I told him that I just come back from spending 4 months in England with Steven Stills. And he said, "Really? Wow." He said, "Look, in the next break, come to my trailer, and I got my guitar, and I'll play you some songs." He was a frustrated rocker. He really wanted to be a rock and roll musician. He didn't want to be Keith Partridge anymore. So this is a funny story about this picture. I used to go to the Eagles house, Don Henley and Glenn Fry, and they would be watching a sports event on TV, and they'd see the UCLA cheerleader, and they had this funny thing, they would say, call Irving and have him send a limo for the cheerleader. You know, it was just their motto saying nobody ever sent a limo for the cheerleader, but, I told that story to David Cassidy, and about a week later, a German magazine said, we'd like to do a home story on David. You asked him if he has any ideas. And he said, yeah, sure I do. Tell him to send a limo for the UCLA cheerleader. And it was fine. They said it. They were more than happy to come up, and they brought these outfits with them, and that wasn't planned, the football outfit and all that. So we spent the day, that's David's house up in the valley in Encino. We had an orange grove in his backyard. And then David got to be really good friends with the girl on the right there. Her name was Delight DeBruin. And they got to be really good friends. And so years later, this picture's hanging on our wall down in Soho at the Morrison Hotel Gallery. I wasn't there, but they told me some guy walked in, watches over to that picture and said, oh, that's my wife on the right there. So, I don't know if you ever heard this story. Here's a very early rock and roll picture at the Renaissance Fair, David Crosby and the Bird. This was an example of just a friend of mine, just very much a fellow folk singer. Remember me, him, talking with his left Baxter Balladeers or something. I think I met him in 63 or 4 in Florida when he was playing the same club or something. Mama Pat Elliott, who was, we call her the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon, because she was a social catalyst. She was an amazing lady. First of all, she was an earth mother, you know, and she wanted to make sure everybody was happy and comfortable and well fed. But she was three things that I would say, three things from my view: extremely intelligent, extremely funny, and extremely hip. You know, two of those wouldn't have been all three. I mean, you know, she was funny, but she was very hip at the same time. And
you should make it.
She was
You'll go in just in case.
Where?
And so,
What time is it?
my partner, Gary
Not
Berger,
yet, not yet. There's only 4 times per minute. Because it's done for us to just go there just to make it,
right there. I played the 5-string banjo. Always wanted an oud. And my father was in the State Department, was going to see
Just in case.
Please find an oud. So he brought it in the airport, and it was a designer oud. You couldn't tune it up, you know, it was a break if you tuned it up. So we finally got to use it for something.
It's better not being able to find a place, especially a nice one. They're all dumps.
And so Gary Berman and I went by there one day and said, we got Gary Berman.
How can people rent dumps?
Right there.
They must be really great. They wouldn't live in it.
no, if I remember what they call it,
Somebody's got, they're gonna live somewhere. It's just wrong.
in the bloody, in the
Yeah, I know, but it's just wrong.
it is wrong.
People are so greedy.
It is like that. Really far in LA. It played on every meeting.
If they wouldn't live in it, why do they expect you to and pay rent on top of it? Oh, those people are, I don't want to, no, just, no. People, no.
Nobody knew who he was. And he came up to me and said, you would like that house? I said, no, I don't know. I know Brother Paul before walking around asking everybody. Nobody knew who it was.
You want to make me a cup of tea? Did you get them clothes off the line?
Already done that.
Oh, good. I'll fold them after.
And you know, it was dark in the party. This was a flash picture, so that makes it very bright. He was working way back.
My cup is here.
And then that was in the picture as well. Yeah, you're dressed up like this.
It's here.
It was the first time wearing this outfit. She wanted to be, she was a pimp. And they called her top.
Are you gonna need monorail to get you in? You know what happened to Dirty here?
Oh, shut up.
You never know.
and then just going out of the sky. I looked at the picture, that's leaning out the window of the very, very, very fine house. And Laurel Canyon. Lovely, lovely lady, very, very talented lady. So this is what it's like to be in the front row at a big concert in the stadium. You're kind of looking up the nose of the person. So this was a shot of Tina Turner. This was Capitol Records that hired me to shoot the concert. And in those days, you know, you had transparency. There were no negatives, no copy. It was before scanning. There was never time to make slide dupes. They were never so good anyway. You had to give them the pictures the next day. So you have to give them all these slides, and you really never see them again. So you try to keep a couple of them back, you know. And I kept this one because I thought, well, they're never going to use this. It looks way too funky, and so I kept that. And a few years ago, a curator from the Boston Museum of Art came, and they were doing a show called Who Stopped Rock, which is an Arthurian country. And she saw that picture and said, oh my God, and so this became the cover of the book. There was billboards, it was on the sides of buses, and I said, oh my God, Tina Turner is just going to kill me when she sees that. But she loved it. That's how it, yeah, it really was dead rock and roll. Here's Truman Capote. A lot later on, when I got established, I was a lot of jobs would start with a phone call in my kitchen in Laurel Canyon. The phone rang, Rolling Stone in New York. Or maybe San Francisco, I don't remember where they were at that point, but they'd say, what are you doing today? And I said, oh, nothing, sit here. But you get on a plane right now and fly to Palm Springs, go to Truman Capote's house, and take a photo for the cover, because we have a whole story that no cover photo. So I went, I said, wow, Truman Capote, I studied his short stories in college, and I knew who he was. I thought, boy, this is. So I would say being a photographer is like having a passport into people's lives. Why would I be a Truman Capote's house? Knocked on the door, he was very gracious. We spent an hour out in the garden taking pictures and talking. He was telling me about his friend Dick Avedon, photographing him in the cornfields. So I took a lot of pictures of him leaning against statues and things in the garden. As I was leaving, he said, wait a minute, I have an idea. We ran in this room and came out with this big coat and scarf, and that was probably 108 degrees outside in Palm Springs. And I was standing out the front door, just saying goodbye to him. He comes running up the minute. And I took a few shots, and then that was the cover of Rolling Stone right there. Of course, when you do these shoots, usually it's the last roll that has the picture. Very often it's the last few pictures you take, because the person's warmed up and they relax and I'm warmed up, and usually you get the best shot at the end. When that movie came out recently about Truman Capote, I saw an ad, and it was with that actor, what his name was, playing Truman Capote, that they had him dressed up like this with a scarf, and I said, wow, that's my picture. This is Bangladesh, the first big rock and roll charity was the concert of Bangladesh that George Harrison put together. And my friend Kip Monk was doing the lighting there, and he told me, he said, Henry, you should come to this big concert we're having. It's gonna, it's gonna be a really famous event. I said, well, Kip, I'd love to, but I don't know the Beatles. I don't know those people. I couldn't get a photo pass. And he said, well, I'll tell you, come in the afternoon. I'll give you a crew pass, and you could hide your cameras under my lighting board, which is what I did. And I saw all day long, Alan Klein was kicking people out. Who had anyone with a camera, he would say, who's that guy? Get him out of here, kick him out, everybody. And I'm walking around thinking, oh my God, don't notice me. So I hid my cameras under the lighting board, and when Bob Dylan came out on stage, I pulled him out and took a few pictures of the two of them. This Paula Litter, this was that day when she called me to come out to Malibu. So we spent the whole day around the pool. It was really cool. Paul was sitting on the pool chair praying with the ladies. And as the little girl held hands and we jumped in the swimming pool, and he sang a little song, 2 little sisters jumping in the pool. And I thought, wow. I mean, it's a beautiful melody, it just went up into the air. I said, wow, that's how you write those songs. You just sit there playing on an instrument. So I knew when that song came out, he sat knocking at the door, and I knew he'd been sitting on, sitting on the couch with a seat on the coffee table, and somebody knocked on the door, and he probably just said, "Who's that knocking on the door?" Made the whole thing look